books that were about my subject and saying, how could this person completely miss X? Yeah, that's gonna be a problem in one way or another, but I'm trying to minimize that as much as I can.
Right, I understand. Look, what? Talk to me real quick about the archives. Like he has archives in Wyoming. I mean, I don't even understand this. How did you get access to?
Oh yeah, the archives. So he in the early '80s, he was reached out to by somebody from the University of Wyoming's American Heritage Center, which is this big center of keeps archives of cultural figures from the United States. And the person who was in charge of it back then was aware of Stan, and this was early '80s. Stan's kind of in a nadir of fame. I mean, he's not Marvel Cinematic Universe era, but he's also not classic '60s, '70s Marvel era. So he's in a little bit of a nether zone. He's trying to get into another business, trying to become a Hollywood guy. And University of Wyoming reaches out and asks if he'd like to start donating his papers and recordings, etc., to them for the American Heritage Center. Now, according to Stan, and you can never totally trust the story Stan told you, he asked who else was in there, and when they said Jack, the radio star, was in it, he said, if it's good enough for Jack Benny, it's good enough for me. And he started donating all of his stuff, not all of his stuff, but, a big steady stream of documents, recordings, etc., to them up until about 2011. And that's just a public archive. You can just go look at that. That's not, it's just very difficult to access. It's in Laramie, Wyoming. You have to fly to Denver and then catch one of two planes a day to Laramie, Wyoming, but it's worth it.
How long did you spend in there going through all that?
I was only there a week, but I had a wonderful research assistant, proxy researcher, sorry, that's the preferred term, who would do this thing where I would look through these. I mean, there's about 200 boxes of stuff. There's a lot of material. I didn't look through all of it. I will fully confess. It would take a very, very long time to look through all of it. I was going off the index, and what I did was I would grab a folder and look and see, okay, this document looks like it's going to be relevant. This doesn't look like it will be. This is yes, yes, no, no. And I would put little tabs at keywords, whatever, then hand them to the proxy researcher who would then scan them. Okay. So I got this gigantic set of PDFs and then also got digitized recordings from the university. They're kind enough to digitize anything you ask for, as long as the tape still functions. So whether that was radio appearances that Stan had recorded or home movies, I mean, that was something that was very remarkable to me, was that they had donated their home movies. I'm sure they had ones they didn't donate, but they donated a stack of VHS tapes of just the family hanging around. It was very strange.
Well, I was going to say, do you think he knew? Because there's stuff in there where he's making, like you point out in the book, he's making some racist comments, some homophobic comments.
Well, that stuff was different. Racist and homophobic comments.
That was from the guy's laptop.
That's from Kia Morgan. Yeah. That was those were recordings I highly doubt. I mean, I shouldn't say I highly doubt. I don't know. Okay. According to Kia, Stan gave permission, and I have my doubts.
I would have my doubts too. That a guy who's been so protective of his image and building himself.
Yeah, up it seems I mean, I don't know. I can't prove it one way or the other. And I grappled with the ethics of using them, but it felt like...
Why did you grapple with the ethics of using them? I mean, it was part of the story. Well,
it is part of the story, but there's part of you that is a decent human being who goes, well, how important is this? And I'm a journalist, so the conclusion I came to was it's important, but you can't help but have a jolt of empathy when you hear stuff like that and go, who among us has not said things they regret that could get them in trouble? Not necessarily the things Stan said, but you have a moment of empathy, and then you say, look, this is part of the story, and it helps you understand.
I mean, I hated it. I hated it.
And it's not, okay.
No,
you hate it, but it's not just to shock. It's not, hi, Kat.
Hello, Kat.
Yeah, this is the perils of doing interviews these days. I totally lost my train of thought.
It's not just a shock. It was part of the story.
No, it's not the shock. It's part of the story. You can't fully understand who Stan was, and therefore understand his public life without understanding aspects of his private life. And unfortunately, the job of a biographer is sometimes a little weird.
Yeah, I mean, and if you haven't read the book, which you should, I mean, what we're talking about is, I mean, oh, goodness gracious, man, this Stan Lee. I'll get to that in a minute. If you don't know what we're talking about, there's a point in the book where, and this is not hearsay, right? This is a laptop where you saw video and recordings of Stan Lee saying,
and audio recordings,
recordings having. I mean, it was it wasn't like he was a KKK member, but he was definitely
no. He made racist remarks, and he made homophobic remark.
And he was 92. He probably people.
He was 93. I mean,
people go
it's
after Walt Disney
question
about that, and I don't know if Disney was anti-Semitic or racist, but I've read the Neil Gabler book about him, and did he say things that were of the time that today would be horrific? Sure, but I don't know if they ever were able to paint Walt Disney as a card-carrying member of the anti-Semitic racist group. So at 90, you're probably going, who knows what his thoughts were. But.
Yeah, I mean, I find that in general in the culture, figuring out whether to praise or condemn the elders or people who are from previous iterations of humanity is kind of a waste of time. What's important is to learn from what they did and try to A, replicate the good behavior, B, not do the not so savory stuff, and C, always, always, always be very conscious of your own blind spots and the fact that there are things that I'm sure seem completely fine to all of us right now that will be pilloried for someday. Right. So you just have to maintain that humility. And yeah, I mean, Stan was pretty old. Does that justify it? For me, who cares? Right. It's not. This is not about me saying whether he was a good man, or certainly he was a great man. But whether he was a good man or a bad man, that's just other people can do that if they like.
I was looking and I didn't find it, and I've read the book about 1.5 times. Well, I've read it once and I've listened to it about 1.5 times. But I was looking for some kind of psychoanalysis, which I know is like, well, go to therapy, Jaffe. That's not my fucking job. but I was looking for some kind of why he was this way. I know you talk about his dad, and I know you talk about his dad really wasn't that active in his life. I mean, were you able to suss out a sense of maybe why this guy was this insecure?
I mean, it's hard to say. I can't sit on the couch with him and do a therapy session, and even if I could, I don't know that you can ever really have answers to the full story about why someone does the things they do. There are environmental factors, there are personality factors, there whatever. And I do think there's a possibility that to some degree, by Stan's own admission, what motivated him was his relationship with his father. I mean, in his memoir, Excelsior, he talks about how he opens the first chapter of the book with him talking about how he always felt bad for his father because his father had this sort of pathetic Great Depression existence while Stan was coming up. His father was intermittently employed and really depressed about it and couldn't provide for his family. And so Stan says something to the effect of, and that's when I decided I was going to always provide. I was always going to have money. I was always going to be stable, and I was going to work for as long as I could. And, that's Stan's own version. And it seems plausible to me, maybe it could very well be that the deciding factor for him was this desire to outdo his dad and also prove to his dad that he was worthwhile, because, Stan, again, this is by Stan's own admission, his dad, Jack Lieber, did not really think much of him and was not satisfied with Stan's choice of life or career. So that could well have been a motivating factor, but I'm not a therapist, and I didn't want to go so far as to say that I'd figured out how his neurons fired,
Okay, so I've never spoken to someone who's written a biography before, so forgive my lay question.
No, go ahead.
Well, what's weird about what you're saying to me is, and maybe I'm hearing it wrong, but
No, go
I will. Oh, I'll get there, baby. Give me a second.
ahead. Sorry, I shouldn't say that.
I got to preamble this shit. But no,
Uh,
is this idea of a lot of the answers you're giving seem to almost be just the facts, ma'am. It's like I didn't have a dog in the fight. I'm just reporting the facts. I don't, which is fine.
yeah.
But then what
Mhm.
motivates you? I mean, why,
So
why?
I think stories are great. I love good stories. It's the same thing as anybody who writes narrative for a living.
Okay,
I love the good stories. It's the same as somebody who writes fiction. You feel passionate about the characters and the narrative. And I hope that doesn't sound too crass, but
no,
unfortunately, that is how nonfiction narrative writing works. It just so happens that, in my opinion, a nonfiction writer has to be more delicate than a fiction writer because you are dealing with human beings and you have ethics that you have to consider relating to that. But I'm drawn to interesting stories that will spark thought and debate and will get people to perhaps understand the world better and also maybe just contribute to the sum total of human knowledge about topics that are relevant and of interest. So that's what motivates me. It was not, did not come to this book trying to settle a score. I did not come to this book thinking that, Stan was one thing or another. I came to it thinking Stan's life is a completely fascinating story of great import to the world. And nobody had told the full version of it yet. And so that was my motivation. Also, I didn't even pitch it. They came to me, but what motivated me while I was doing that was this desire to tell this fascinating story about a fascinating person.
So okay, and I appreciate that answer. That makes a lot more sense to me. Like I said, I don't understand how your world works, but I appreciate
Sure,
that.
that's fine.
Larry Lieber, Stanley's brother, you spent a lot of time, well, comparatively.
I did. Yeah. Well. Yeah, I did. Yeah, we spoke for a good. God, I'm blanking on exactly how much it was. I think it was about 5.5 hours. It was 4 hours in one session, and then an hour and a half another time, and a few minor follow-up calls over the phone. But he was very generous with his time. I will be forever grateful to Larry that he was so willing to speak with me.
And but you paint a picture in the book that he's kind of, he not a very happy guy, right? I mean, he seems kind of.
I don't know. I mean, it's the times I spoke to him, it seems like he has a lot of wounds related to his relationship with Stan and the relationship that they both had with their father.
Yeah.
And Larry's had a rough go of it. As I say in the book, he lost two romantic partners. His wife and then his life partner, who he met after that, both died, and he's alone, and he lives alone in a studio apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and he doesn't have a steady stream of income, from a pension or anything, and he has a rough go of it, and there's still a lot of pain when he talks about Stan, because he and Stan did not have a great relationship.
Right.
It was not constant feuding or anything. This wasn't, Liam and Noel Gallagher or anything. It was something much sadder, which is a relationship that exists and plods along, but does not have much love in it. I mean, I asked Larry at one point whether Stan had ever told him that he loved him. And Larry just said no. Yeah. It had never happened. Stan had never said the words, "I love you, Larry," which, what can you say,
Yeah, no, I mean, that speaks a lot. What about the relationship with his daughter? Let me ask you this. Do you believe?
Yeah, that's also, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was some stuff that you didn't report on, but you reported on the reporting where people had said there was elder abuse and that her mother had visible bruises and she had grabbed Stan by the throat and shoved him against a window. I mean, and she never spoke with you. She wouldn't talk with you. But
I spoke to her for about 3 minutes. I recapped that in the introduction of the book. I called her and we spoke for about 3 minutes, and then she said she wouldn't speak with me further. So that was the extent of my direct interactions with his daughter, JC. But yeah, that was a very difficult relationship. I mean, whatever you believe about the alleged, behavior, the fact is, for one thing, if you'd heard the recordings I had heard, you would see that this was a deeply toxic relationship. I mean, Kia Morgan, this person who was in their lives near the end of Stan's life, as we said, made these recordings, these ambient recordings of Stan at his home and in his car. And I heard them, and you hear how bad JC and Stan could be to one another. I mean, just awful, awful verbal abuse. I mean, just stuff you really hope you never have to have in your family. Um, and again, by Stan's admission, by to a certain extent JC's admission, and certainly by the admission of a lot of people around them, JC and to a certain extent Joan, Stan's late wife, really were a factor in Stan's professional life insofar as they were shopaholics. They had very expensive tastes. And I probably wouldn't have included that if it hadn't been relevant to understanding Stan. I'm not in the interest of writing a gossip column
Sure.
about these two people. And I certainly know the tropes of misogyny that go along with that, talking about women and shopping, et cetera. But at the same time, you can't understand why Stan made a lot of the professional decisions he made if you don't understand that he needed liquid cash for his wife and daughter.
Right.
And again, he said that. You have to pick around and find this full, portrait. But once you put all these things together, you see that he was going to conventions long after he wanted to because he needed to provide. He was,
and not just provide, but provide at a level that was
extravagant. He decided to go start his first post-Marvel company, the disaster of Stan Lee Media. Again, according to his business partner there, Peter Paul, who's a whole separate story. Stan had said, "I need the money. I can't." He was getting his contract renegotiated with Marvel, and the initial thing was I can't live off of $500,000 a year. Like that, which is an unspeakable sum for the average person.
Right.
He was like, I can't, that's not going to work.
Right.
And Stan didn't, Stan
I think you would even say
it wasn't him.
That he was crying about it. I mean, he literally
was, according to Peter, that was what happened. He just was crying and saying, I can't live off of that amount of money. And so you have to understand his difficult relationship with his daughter if you're going, and you also have to understand it to understand where his legacy is going, because she is the extent of the estate. She is the estate of Stan Lee. And that's important to understand when it comes to where the Stan Lee brand is going to go and where the legacy is. So it's important to understand it, but it is very hard to look at times.
I'm wondering about, because I see it, I'm wondering about the fan reaction to this. I know there was Roy Thomas, who was Stan's assistant for a while and was an editor for a while at Marvel and a big name in comics on his own right. And he wrote a kind of a guest column, I guess, in the Hollywood Reporter about the book. And I guess the gist of it, I read it, but my take on the gist of it was, that he was like, this is a good book. It's well-researched. It's a smart book. It's well-written. But there's this 5% of the book that really kind of makes me think that Abraham had I think his words were thumb on the scale, sort of to write this, and my question is, what was your response when you saw that?
Yeah, Roy's entitled to his opinion. I do thank him for the fact that he went out of his way in the article to credit that I didn't get that this was not about facts being wrong. It was about difficult questions that are hard to resolve. And he felt that my emphasis had been on the wrong things, and that there were things I should have included that would have painted a different picture. And unfortunately, you can't write a book that's going to be everything to everybody. I worked with what I had. I went with what seemed true. And I genuinely, I'm not saying this sarcastically, I do appreciate that he did not tell people, well, this book is a bunch of BS. Right. That was not his comment.
Well, I have to ask, because the two things that did strike me that were like, I'm curious about this, that he was suggesting was, the Fantastic Four covers a decent amount in the book where it's like, there is no real way to know who created it. And Kirby says he did for the most part. But Roy Thomas says, well, the document that a lot of people allege Stan wrote afterwards,
the synopsis,
to kind of make it look like he did it, but it was written later. It has a lot of stuff that was not in the comic. So Roy's like, if he was going to go back and sort of, relitigate the past, why would he write a bunch? I mean, he would have had to have been really either dumb or incredibly brilliant to write stuff.
I will say on that, for one thing, I don't know what happened, but B, I when it comes to that document, what I think is much more likely than Stan forging it at a later date,
Right.
is that it was written after a conversation with Kirby.
Okay.
Like,
Okay.
that's the issue. I have. It seems unlikely to me that it would be a forgery, although you never know.
Never know.
What seems much more likely to me is, as a possibility, again, I'm not saying I was in the room and I know this happened. What seems much more likely is that Kirby had the idea and came up with the characters. Again, this is a likelihood, not a certainty in any way. And then had a conversation with Stan, where after that, Stan or somebody sat down and typed up a synopsis.
Right.
And then but the point was the ball could have started rolling with Jack, and then Stan could still have written that synopsis in 61 while still not being the progenitor. So that's the more likely scenario, I would say.
Have you gotten what has the fan reaction been like? This book's been out for about 4 or 5 months, I think, right? And what is the
I've been really gratified. There have been obviously a lot of people who don't like it, and there was kind of an early troll campaign in terms of the Amazon reviews, where a lot of people who hadn't read the book were just tossing in 0-star reviews or 1 or however it works. But other than that, let me put it this way: I have yet to hear from a single person who read the book and would give it 0 stars.
Yeah, no,
you know, I've gotten lots of people saying, which is very gratifying for me, not to sound selfish. They'll say, I went in thinking this was going to be a hatchet job, and I came out thinking it was very fair. And that is all I'm looking for. I'm not looking for people to necessarily say, okay, now I see that Stan was X, Y, or Z. I just want to tell a truthful story and suggest further questions you can ask yourself. So, you know, I'm not looking out to do a hatchet job, and it's been very gratifying when people have identified that.
I see a real, and maybe this exists everywhere, but I see a real similarity between video game fans and comic fans in this respect.
Oh yeah, a lot of overlap, obviously.
There is a lot of overlap, but in terms of, like, you know, especially since I've been doing this stream, and I put a premium on being as honest and genuine as I can. I don't like a lot of hucksterism and stuff. I think it just doesn't. I had a bad experience with all that, and so I see a lot of video game fans that they really don't want the truth. And you know, and I see that with comic fans as well. It's like, let me believe in this thing. Let me believe this game is a 10 out of 10. And if you come to the table and you start explaining to me there are some problems, you become the bad guy. You become the target because you're delivering this message.
Yes, you don't want to end up sounding like you know, an anti-woke warrior or something, where it's like, you know, if people are mad at me, that means I'm doing my job right. You know, that's not what I'm talking about. But sorry, I interrupted you.
No. All I was gonna say is this is medicine to me. I mean, this is you don't want to take it, but I think society would be better off if we didn't put people on pedestals.
No, that's how I feel too. I mean, if that's one place where I'm biased, then so be it. I just don't, you know, when we talk about tearing down statues, I'm for tearing down every anthropomorphic statue in the whole wide world. I do not think there is any. I mean, I guess maybe there's some social utility to venerating people, as we were saying earlier, but we certainly do it too much. And I was hoping that this book would be, as you say, medicine or an antidote or something in some small way to that.
Okay, and for me as a fan, as a guy who met the guy, had an opportunity to work with the guy for a little bit. Nothing ever came of it. You know, prayed at the altar of the guy. I can tell you, I appreciated it. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So you didn't grow up though being a massive Stan fan. I mean, what
No, not really. Yeah,
so
good.
what are your like what are your passions if it's not Stan Lee?
Well, I loved, like I said, I certainly loved Marvel. That was a huge early passion. I mean,
Okay.
Star Wars was always sort of my number one up until, I don't know, I guess the end of Revenge of the Sith. I sort of said goodbye to it, and then it
Right.
wouldn't actually go away. But and various other
So
things.
you are a geek.
Oh,
You
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay.
I sometimes put on a good show that I'm not, but I'm very much so. I mean, look at the bookshelf here. It's all,
Graphic
you got
novels, right?
East of West, Flex Mentallo, Hicksville, The Filth. I mean, come on.
Gotcha. Okay.
Anders Nilsson. So yeah, no, I'm the real deal when it comes to caring about comic books and superhero fiction, even though they drive me completely insane because they're terrible 90% of the time.
Right.
That 10% is, let me mainline it. That's everything to me.
Right.
So, look, I have ADHD. It's always been easier for
Me
me
too.
to read comics than prose. I obviously do read prose. That's the other half of the bookshelf back here. But it's a much more pleasurable experience for me to read a comic book.
Yeah.
And I really love this stuff. So, Stan was not a personal idol of mine, but, that picture that's in the book of me meeting him, that was me at the Wizard World Comic Con. I
Right.
believe it was 1998 in Chicago. Well, technically Rosemont, Illinois, but basically Chicago. And, when I went to get his signature on that beat up copy of Fantastic Four number 47, it wasn't so much because he was Stan. It was more just because this was part of Marvel history, and
Right.
Marvel meant a lot to me. This is a historical figure from this institution that means a lot, which personally I look back on my childhood and think, isn't that interesting that, like, you know, I was kind of ahead of the curve in maybe a bad way in terms of venerating the brand above the actual creators, which
Right.
is something we do across entertainment now, but especially with superhero fiction. But anyway, go ahead.
Well,
Yes.
no. Who did you look up to in comics? Like who were your idols?
Oh, well, my idol, it's funny, in the earliest days, it was lots of, people who just happened to be popular at the time. I started reading comics and Marvel comics at a weird kind of nadir spot, like around the bankruptcy
Okay.
and
So like
the Clone
'90s.
Saga, like
Okay.
mid to late 90s,
Okay.
this sort of weird realm. So like, my heroes early on were like Joe Casey and Stephen T. Seagal, like,
Mark
these
Waid and Kurt Busiek
yeah,
and yeah,
right.
yeah,
Like all
yeah,
these guys,
yeah.
I wanted to be a writer,
Yep.
and so I loved the writers. There were artists I liked too,
Right.
but the people I really looked up to, and then later it becomes others. And now I don't want to go down the whole list because then it'll turn into a too personal thing. But there were plenty of creators I cared about, but none of them that I really worshipped. I mean, there was no one I really, especially when I was young, who I went, I want to base my life on this person.
So
Whereas
have
with
you
Stan,
ever had that kind of parasocial
oh,
with
sure,
any
sure. But yes, but that
who
was,
what was that?
well, mainly with the mainly with the musician Beck. I became completely
Okay.
obsessed with Beck when I was a teenager, and that lasted for some axial years where a lot about my life and personality was formed. But that was pretty exceptional. I didn't have many heroes like that. Beck was sort of the be all end all, and then other stuff. It was, I don't know. Maybe I'm not that kind of guy. I guess
No, I
it's
mean maybe that's why you can write what you do. I mean, because I was going to ask, we
oh,
can't get
maybe.
into details, but what drew you to want to write about Vince McMahon for your next book? I mean,
Oh yeah, well he's similar to what we're talking about. The basic fact of it is, beyond any thematic declarations, Vince McMahon's story is freaking fascinating, and it has never been told in full. It just hasn't. I mean, if I wrote a book about Vince McMahon that was just what we already knew about Vince McMahon when I started writing it,
right.
it would be the most fascinating story you ever read. Now you add in all the stuff I've uncovered and that people didn't know, and it becomes this very interesting story.
I
So
cannot
my job
fucking
is to
wait for this book, man.
my job is to not get in the way of a good
Right.
story. I find a good story and then I try to just let it be told, as opposed to going, how can I be fancy schmancy about this? But yeah, you want me to whet your appetite? I just got back a couple of weeks ago from North Carolina. I did this road trip around every place that he lived while he was growing
Oh,
up to look at archives and talk to old timers. And I won't say anything about what I found, but there's interesting
I
stuff in there.
assume
Yeah.
you've seen the interview he did. Was it Bryant
Playboy?
Gumbel? No,
Oh, which one?
it was
Oh, with
video.
Bob
Bob
Costas. Yeah.
Costas. And
Yeah. Yeah.
here's
Yeah.
what I don't know, and maybe you're not ready to say. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, the whole the thing that is obviously fascinating about him is that there is that whole where even with all the wrestlers, where does the real wrestler start?
Right.
You
Where
know,
does the line get drawn? Yes,
how
exactly.
much of Vince is in that interview with Bob Costas, or is that character?
Oh, I will not hold my cards out and you show them
Okay.
quite early enough
When I read the
with
book,
that.
will I
But
know? Will I read?
oh, well, with that, I mean, here's the thing. When it comes to that book, I feel like I should be seeding this in every interview I do where people are like, oh, I love the Stan book. Can't wait for the Vince book. It's going to be a different kind of biography because there were just handicaps. There's no Vince archive that he made
Right.
publicly available. He is still alive. He
Yep.
is somebody who is very much feared. So I will, if you come to my Vince McMahon book expecting me to say, and here is exactly what Vince was thinking this day when he did X, Y, or Z, you're not going to find it. And I apologize. I wish I could. Maybe there will be some
Right.
second edition of it someday. But as it is right now, this is much more about a life and its consequences. It's the consequences and understanding the motivations to the best degree that I can, but understanding also, perhaps more importantly, the impact that Vince McMahon has had and the impact that he's had in every stage of his life. You know,
What do you think is the most similar thing between Vince McMahon and Stan Lee?
well, I mean, one thing is they both took industries that were not regarded as art, as art producing, and really, although they weren't, again, in both cases, they weren't the only people that were getting people to look at comics as art, but they were probably the main people getting
Right.
the comics or wrestling as art. You know, they were the people who took these art forms and more than anyone else legitimized them for a wide swath of people. And there are also people who have created characters that are called the same name as them, but
Right. Right.
are not them. They are not coterminous. There are a lot of overlaps, but these are both guys who had fictional biographies, whether that's explicitly fictional, like with Vince, or just sort of implicitly fictional with Stan. They were constructs. And those constructs led to characters called Stan Lee or Vince McMahon, who happen to be very different in some ways from Stan Lee and Vince McMahon.
Fascinating. Amazing. A couple more questions because I know you got to go. Do you think, and again, I know I'm asking things that the proper answer is, Jaffe, I don't know. But I want to know.
Give it a shot. See
I'm
what
going to
happens.
give it a shot because I want to know what you think. Because I mean, I walk away from the Stan Lee book thinking this was not a happy guy. Stan Lee was not a happy guy. I don't mean he suffered from depression, like I said. I don't mean he was like
No, I get it. He was unsatisfied.
He was unsatisfied with his life. Do you think that's accurate from what you've researched?
You know, if I'm going to go out on a limb, I would say I think even as late as his final days, Stan remained pretty unsatisfied with how things had gone. I mean, there were certainly things he was proud of, but he always thought that the best thing was going to be just over the horizon.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you know, in those final days, you have, Kia Morgan played me a recording, actually is one he sent to me, of Stan it's context free. You don't know exactly what the circumstances were, but it's him complaining about POW Entertainment, the second post-Marvel company that he had, the one that was going up until his death,
Right.
and is still going. And it's him saying, I don't understand why they couldn't get me a hit. Like, why in 15 years they haven't been able to get me a hit movie? And it's like, you'd think there are a lot of people who would look at, okay, well, I'm in these cameos for these other movies that are enormous, and I've become cemented in the culture as an icon, and I make $1 million a year from Marvel for doing nothing. They'd think that was enough. But Stan wanted something else, and that had driven him throughout his entire life, his entire career. He had aspired, and this is not me writing fiction in his head. This is me going off of his own words, corroborated by his actions. And what you're left with is this portrait of a guy who was always convinced that paradise was just over the next hill. And,
It's sad. It's sad. To me, it's sad. I mean, there's a great quote that I always use by Jay-Z where he says, my pain, my pain, your entertainment. I mean, it's fascinating,
yes.
that applies here as well. One more question I have. What do you think, it's hard to deny the similarities between Stan Lee selling a bill of goods, some of it real, some of it not, but, a character to the world, and how easily it seemed he was bamboozled by so many other people doing the exact same thing. I mean, was there any analysis that you were able to do?
Again, I can't claim to know how people's brains work. No, I know.
You're closer to the guy than anybody.
You got to give the preamble. I get to give the preamble.
No, I'm editing it out. It's going away. I'm going to say Okay, go.
No. Wait, now I forgot. What did you just ask me?
He was surrounded by all these guys.
Oh, yeah, the blind spot. He had a blind spot.
Yeah.
He had a blind spot, and maybe it had to do with the fact that he himself could fabricate things, mislead, say things that were not true, and kind of sell himself as a person that you'd want to do business with and that you'd want to look up to. So too, were there people in his life who tried to do that personally with him?
Yeah.
And it's impossible to say exactly why, but I do think you're onto something. I think there's a strong possibility that it was one of the ironies of human behavior, which is very often we're most blind to the stuff that we think we're able to pull off against other people. As soon as someone tries using our tricks against us, it's not great design, but the human brain often just develops a blind spot and doesn't expect that other people are going to be able to be as good as we are at deceiving ourselves and others as others can be at deceiving us.
Okay.
And it is a sad story. I mean, I tried to figure out how to end it without it landing like it did, and then I just decided, you know what? It's a sad story. We should sit with the sadness. It
is sad. It is absolutely sad. Last three questions are 1 or 2 answer questions only.
Yeah, go ahead.
You got to go.
Sure.
Well, I'm trust me, I could ask you a bunch, but okay. So, number one, do you think when you look at culture right now, who do you think is the most genuine personality out there? Really kind of, I'm curious, because
I don't know. That's a hard thing to say.
Well, I know. And who is the one, do you have a target, not a target, but do you have somebody you look at and go, that's a guy or a woman in the public eye that really is not being truthful in a way that's potentially...
Well, I don't know. I mean, plenty of people. I mean, that's how humans operate. I don't want to single anybody out because I'd be a hypocrite. I mean, we're all putting on a show to a certain extent.
Yeah,
I don't.
Don't you try not to though? Don't you? The older you get,
sure, you try. The older I get, and one thing is the more successful I get, I can afford to be myself because
that's
I think
true.
each thing we don't talk about is the market forces you into certain sets of behaviors, whether that's like you're trying to get yourself over as a personality in the public sphere, or even just trying to get by. You have to act certain ways, and sometimes that leads to you putting on a false face or misleading people.
No, it's a great point. It's a great point. I mean, it's a privilege to be honest, which is pathetic, but it's
completely. I am so lucky that I am allowed to say what I think to a certain extent. I mean, there are certainly things that I won't say because I know that I will get punished for them.
Fuck those guys at Crown. I know what I saw your. I'm kidding.
I got it. But anyway, so yes, that's basically my answer.
Okay. ADD. I have ADD as well. What medicine are you on?
Oh,
I'm on Concerta. I recommend it. It's good. Are you on?
No, I'm taking Adderall.
Okay.
It helps, I think.
Yeah. It bothers me. It bothers me. People don't think it's real. I hate that line of thought. I'm like, dude, I assure you, it's fucking real.
But no, I know. I'm right there with you.
Okay.
I do find it irritating sometimes when people sort of oversimplify it and go like, just ADHD, hashtag just ADHD things. having trouble getting up in the morning. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, we all, I
Right.
say this as someone with ADHD, let's not try to be too proprietary about like basic human
Right.
struggles,
Yeah.
you know?
This is. I can get up in the morning, but then it's like I know I should pay the bills. I can afford to pay the bills, but God, that's boring. I would,
Right, sure. There are plenty of things that are legitimately symptoms of ADHD. So
Yeah.
I should not. I'm not denying that. I
Understood.
am
Okay, my
somebody there.
last
Anyway,
question. So, okay, and you may not be able to say your Vince book is coming down the road. You're
at
working
some
on it
point, yeah.
now. Can you talk about why it's not coming when you thought it might be coming? Like, what are you
Well,
doing
yeah,
right
sure. I
now?
mean, the main. I mean, here's the thing. It may well come out in 2022, which was my initial guess. Never promised anything. My initial guess. It could well come out late 2022. There's some stuff going on that has, like professionally, nothing anyone needs to worry
No,
about.
can you
That has
say what
diverted
you're
my attention.
writing? Can you say what you're working on? Is what I'm saying.
Oh, no, no, no. Well, I'm working on an article right now for a big outlet that I can't
You can't talk
talk
about it.
about, but
Okay.
it'll come out soon, and it's long, and you'll see why I kind of got derailed. But everybody's fine with that. Don't worry.
Excellent.
It may well come out in 2022 still. If it doesn't, don't worry. I'll make it worth the wait.
Okay, listen, Andrew Riesman. I hope to God you had a nice.
Abraham,
God damn it, Abraham Riesman. You know
you
what?
got so close. You
Because
got the last
I
name
was
right.
focusing on the last time this time.
Yeah.
Listen,
You nailed it.
listen.
It's fine.
Abraham Riesman. I love your book. I hope people read your book and
Well,
take
that
it.
means a lot to me.
I'm
Thank
glad
you.
it does because it's a hell of a hell of a tonic for people like me that grew up idolizing people that maybe don't need to be idolized. I hope you had a nice chat with us. I hope
I did actually.
Okay.
This was a lot of fun.
Well,
Thank
I
you so
hope when the
much.
Vince book comes out, you're willing to come
Oh
back
yeah,
on.
we'll. It would be my pleasure.
I would
Don't even
love.
worry
And,
about it.
are you going to get to talk to the guys who are wrestling and the ladies wrestling now, or Vince is like, no fucking way you're talking to Asuka. No way you're talking to.
I will. The research is not done. I'd
Okay.
rather not
Gotcha.
get into
All
the
right.
details.
All
But
right,
yeah,
buddy. Thank you so much for your time and for your work.
thank you.
Talk to you later, man. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Well, there he goes off into the evening, fellas. I apologize. I think what happened was that I know a lot of people were saying, "I don't understand, Jaffe. How are you streaming? Because it's not live." Something I believe occurred with the broadcast software. I am almost convinced that I have it recorded. I know we definitely broadcast the second half. If it turns out the first half is not recoverable, I will go back and edit into the beginning of the video a little bit of sort of what it was that Abraham was talking about, just so to bring people up to speed. But something happened on the internet end where we weren't able. I'm only realizing it like 20 minutes ago that first like 20 minutes of the interview was not broadcast, but I do think it's recorded, and I think because of that, I'll be able to share it with you guys when this goes up on YouTube. But yeah, he didn't have a lot of time today. I really recommend this book, True Believer. You can't see me anymore. The Rise and Fall of Stan Lee. It's great. It's really good. And it was live, Rob. It absolutely was live. But what happened was the beginning of it kind of was being, I think, recorded. I won't know until I turn this off. But it was being recorded, but it may not have been being broadcast. So I will be back later today. I will be doing some Ratchet and Clank streaming relatively soon in a couple of hours. Just got to get some stuff going on around the house and fix my plumbing, which is a fucking nightmare, but I think we're okay. And in the meantime, fellas, I will see you guys maybe at the Ratchet and Clank or next week. John Romero's coming on, and we're obviously back to some normal Gabbin' and Game shows during the week. I hope you're well. Rob the Mod, thank you for modding. I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation.